we have the time to start our second session. So thank you for warming the session with the pre-session discourse and communication between the panel discussants and presenters. So in session 2, I believe that we can have really great discussion in session 2 as well. So before we start our session, there's a quick announcement to make, after which I will hand over my microphone to moderator. So my announcement, which is I said earlier as well, this is how to set your language for interpretation. As we have English speaker presenting the presentation in English, if you want to listen to that presentation in Korean, you have to select Korean button in the interpretation.
Listen the whole presentation translated into English. 네, 이것으로 제 안내는 일단 마치고 네, 구기영 교수님께 무대를 넘기도록 하겠습니다. 구기영 교수님은 지금 서울대학교 아시아 연구소에서 계십니다. 네, 부탁드립니다.
네, 안녕하세요. 오늘 사회를
Good afternoon. My name is Gi-Yeon from the Asia Research Center from Seoul National University. I would like to thank you for inviting me to this international conference as a moderator. And from the very early morning, we covered various topics just to befit the topic of the international conference, which is cultural diversity. We do have two speakers during the session, and having you, I think, represent the cultural diversity, because the two professors are going to cover the topics that are very new, and that's something that we are very interested in knowing. And I wish that I can be up to your expectation as a moderator during the session. During the session, we are going to talk about perspectives of cultural diversity. First of all, I would like to introduce to you the two speakers and also discussant. Our first speaker is going to talk about digital iterations of cultural diversity, and her name is Theyie Keditsu from Kohima College. And we have the second speaker from Changwon National University, Ji-Yeong, and she is going to talk about criticizing multiculturalism from the perspective of Bruno Latour's multinaturalism, cultural diversity, and feminist issues from the perspective of the actor network theory. We have Professor Kwang-Jin, professor of Chung-Ang University, as discussant. I think it will be too long to really introduce to you about all the research of the three speakers. I think the Professor Lee is also a poet at the same time, and also she is researching about minority groups, and also the second speaker received a master's and PhD, and also major is a feminist philosophy, and also discussant is majoring in French literature. Time now is 10 to 3, and I would like to give the first speaker 20 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Professor. And I want to thank, particularly before I begin, I really want to thank Professor Yoo Kyung-byun, because I was unwell, and despite all my troubles, she really made sure that I could take part. And so I'm very, very grateful. I'll just share my screen now, and I will begin my presentation. So are you all able to see my screen? Today, I want to discuss digital iterations of cultural diversity, the case of Nagas on Instagram. I'm a Naga. I'm from a state in the northeast of India, and it's called Nagaland. And so I've based most of my research on the Nagas on social media. The body in traditional Naga culture is vocal and visible. If one can anachronistically conceptualize a Naga self, it would be one that is embodied, one that is entrenched in networks of kinship. Whether it was gender, class, status within one's clan or village, or one's broader village or tribal identity, it was the body first that declared it, much before speech and pleasantries or conflict confirmed it. Beginning with markings and modifications of the actual body in the form of tattoos, piercings, hairstyles, to clothing and adornments placed on the body. Speaking with and through our bodies was a crucial and spectacular way of owning and conveying one's own identity. It is no wonder then that fashion in its modern sense is a practice that comes naturally to most Nagas. In modernity at large, Arjun Appadurai sees our current modern world as an interactive system that has witnessed a technological explosion which has created communities with no sense of place. He proposes that the universal or global socializing and social practice is the imagination. With imagination as social practice as our frame of reference, we can look at the ways Nagas, in particular the youth, and how they navigate the new placeless world of social media, to analyze their behavior therein as survival, adaptive, but also as disruptive struggles. If imagination now defines agency, image may then be understood as a new language in and through which identities are articulated or performed on Instagram. In Subjectivities for Better or Worse, Guattari notes our aptitude for creating selves and proposing a more fluid notion of subjectivity. As an ethico-aesthetic project, subjectivity is constantly in the making, a creative process that is, in the words of Simon O'Sullivan, I quote, multivalent and polyphonic, unquote. If mass media is characterized by the creation of content by a few powerful elite and disseminated to the faceless multitude, the era of social media allows for the inversion of this relationship. True, the medium and mode are still predominantly determined by the owner-creators of these sites and are entrenched within hyper-capitalist structures. Nevertheless, within the set parameters of interaction and behavior is a vast labyrinth that offers enough variation and play that one can argue it almost simulates what many may consider freedom. Within these modalities of pseudo-free play, social media sites allow the faceless multitude to create content and populate said universe with image, text, and interactions of their choosing. In light of this scenario, Guattari's argument that new technology, in particular, new machines of communication and information, open up new universes of reference, allowing for new productions of subjectivity on a signifying register, but also an affective one, becomes highly significant. Social media sites become rich fields for participant observation, and it is no wonder that the inherent visuality of images allow for and perhaps even facilitate bodies and fashion to be the focal reference of identity. This is especially true of the Nagas, who are astute practitioners of visual culture when it comes to clothing and fashion. The pictures I'm sharing here, for people who know about Nagas or for Nagas themselves, as soon as you look at these images, you are able to identify which tribes these men belong to, what is their social status. You're able to know so many things just from the way that they have dressed themselves. This may stem from a traditional culture where attire functioned both at the level of signification and affect. Here, one is a warrior and the other one is relaxing. Learning these codes ensured literal survival in the days of headhunting. It signified that the wearer belonged to one's own tribe or that he or she did not. It conveyed and evoked emotions of solidarity, affection, respect, or fear. From the days of old till present, learning what to wear and how to appear has been a crucial skill and survival strategy. It is no wonder that circumstances that brought about a separation of our dress from our identities and by extension our culture have also resulted in deep-seated scars and traumas in our individual and collective psyches. Writing about the impact of the Baptist Church on Naga society, Julian Jacobs reports that, I quote, Christians were more likely to adopt Western dress and to lose interest in the ornaments which signified their position within traditional society, unquote. Added to this, the outcome of cultural colonization and westernization produced generations of Nagas for whom Western dress signified a civilized modern identity. In her paper, From Loinclothes, Suits to Olive Greens, Dolly Kikon understands the unclothing of the Naga body as an act of resistance to colonial and religious subjugation, the rejection of Western dress and notions of modesty as a way of reclaiming one's indigenous identity. Given their propensity for appearance, Nagas have used attire and fashion as a means of gaining cultural capital, as well as a means of reconnecting with a cultural past that was violently separated from us upon conversion. The youth also use it not only to demonstrate cultural capital, but also in a manner similar to youth immersed in punk subculture of the 1970s, I quote, restate their opposition to dominant values and institutions, unquote. In particular, our encounter with the technology of photography was serendipitous in that it produced a visual object of the bodies we had adorned. Oral accounts of first seeing photographs of oneself or other Naga subjects report reactions of awe, fear, incredulity, that ultimately settle into not only an acceptance of this technology, but also a desire to acquire it and to master its use. From being photographed by visitor outsiders, modernity brought photo studios to our town. For generations of young Nagas in the early to mid 20th century, dressing up in Western wear and heading out with friends to get their photos taken in photo studios such as these became a popular social pastime. The advent of the smartphone, a communication device that continues to supplant the oral with the visual with each new iteration, has transformed the way identities can be inhabited, experienced, and conveyed. This is nowhere more so.
Excuse me, Professor.
Yes.
지금 슬라이드가 2페이지에 고정이 되어 있어요.
So your slide is fixed to slide 2. So can you flip the slide to the page that is appropriate to your presentation, because we only see the slide 2 in your presentation material.
Oh, no, that's terrible, because that's terrible. I'm going to try screen sharing again. Yeah. Oh, this is terrible. I wanted you all to see all the. Are you able to see this now? Are you able to see this?
No, I think it is fixed to slide number 2. Can you flip to slide 3 or 4? At least it is moving.
I've been moving it on my laptop. I don't understand how. Professor Yu-Kyung, would you be able to help me in this department? Would you be able to take over the PowerPoint then? Or I'm just going to stop sharing and then I'm going to share again. Let's see if that works.
네, 지금 마이크를
Are you
다시
a-
켰고요.
Are you able to see it now?
지금 네 보이는데요. 사진을 아까 못 봤던.
Are you able to see it now?
Can we go to slide 9 or 10 so that we can see pictures? We are on slide 11 right now. So can
Okay.
you flip to other slides with
Yeah,
photos?
I'm going to go back to this
그러면
slide.
제
Are you able to see this? Are
you
you
can
able to
only see slide 11, the Instagram slide on slide 11. We cannot see photos. Are you flipping the slide right now?
Yeah, yes, I'm flipping the slides. I'm going to try again. Are you able to see this?
지금은
아까 말씀하셨던.
Yeah, and then can you
yes,
see?
I think we can see the old-fashioned 3 males
Yeah,
standing in the photo, and we see 2 photos. Can
Yes.
you flipping to other slides from here?
Sure.
Can you give it
see
a try?
that?
네, 보이시나요?
Can you see me changing now?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you very much.
Oh, fantastic.
It is
Oh my
changing.
gosh.
Thank you
You've
very
missed
much.
a lot then. So this was my first visual slide. So these are, this is a Naga men in traditional dress. These are, taken in modern, these days, contemporary times. They're dressed up in costume now. And these are women. And this is where I was. So the photo studios, I'll just continue. This is nowhere more so than the case in the plethora of apps developed to allow for the communication and commerce of identities amongst people of the world in virtual space. An app created for iPhone 4, Instagram was released on October 2nd, 2010 until 2015, restricted to a single square format and gave users all over the world the same set of controls for editing photos. In Instagram, Lev Manovich writes, I quote, different elements of photo culture that throughout the 19th and 20th century were separate now have been combined in a single platform. It allows you to capture, edit, and publish photos, view photos of your friends, discover other photos through search, interact with them in the form of liking, commenting, reposting, posting to other networks, entering into conversations with photo authors and others who left comments, create photo collections and change their order, etc., all from a single device. The source of the images I have used for this paper is at the rate of Naga street style. I hope you can see this, and is my point of entry into my main arguments. Begun by 2 Naga sisters with a professed love for fashion, this Instagram handle seeks to collate and document what they term live street style. For the fashion illiterate, that is jargon for the looks people put together for daily or occasional events, using clothes, accessories like shoes, jewelry, handbags, makeup, etc. As of today, they have 104,000 followers. The modes of creating content range from the handle owners scouting events or everyday times and spaces for people who they deem have interesting personal style, to combing through the universe of social media and selecting images from individual users. Content contribution also works the other way when Instagram users tag Naga street style on particular photos or looks if they wish to be featured. Whether the said image or look finally ends up on the handle is left to the discretion of the owners. Since November 2017 or thereabouts, Naga street style has created a space to exclusively feature looks that incorporate traditional wear, both in its pure and fusion forms. I hope you can see this. As a recognized influencer, a term used for social media users who have a noticeable influence on taste and behavior, the creation of this space has surely in turn swayed its public's desire and choice to wear traditional wear on more occasions. The success of their roots feature has also spawned a number of handles dedicated to featuring people from specific Naga tribes in their tribal attire. Taeborlang T. Kharsityu sees fashion as a site of resistance, a means to challenge the imposition of a pan-Indian identity that often erases Northeastern idiosyncrasies. In his seminal work on punk subculture, Dick Heptidge explained style as a signifying practice. If fashion is a signifying practice that underscores process over fixity, it is a perpetual signifier that can absorb a myriad multiplicity of identities, transmitting them as one and many at the same time. Fashion thus becomes a way for youth to inhabit identities drawn from different cultures and epochs across the world and across time. Within these epistemological parameters, we are able to interpret these images of youth wearing torn jeans, not as delinquent victims of fashion who have lost ties to their roots and community, but as active agents conversant in the language of contemporary global fashion and all that torn jeans symbolize: a critique of consumerism, an ironic demonstration of the hypocrisies of the fashion industry, the appropriation of working class, even poverty fabrics by capitalism and class politics. I could go on. When united with a tribal body, these torn jeans take on another level of significance, simultaneously claiming affinity and perhaps equality with Gigi Hadid's white, privileged, upper-class body, but also at the same time acutely highlighting the infinite gulf that will forever divide Hadid from the wearer's Naga body. These looks are then carefully constructed ideological statements. As are looks of or fashion statements that play with permutations and combinations of ethnic and contemporary fashions. I hope you can see this image now. This is a girl dressed in denim wear, and she's painted a copy of the traditional tattoos that were done on women from the Ao tribe. Again, these images challenge the stereotyping of youth as disconnected from their indigenous roots. Rather, they argue for a dynamic engagement with one's traditional cultural materials and a desire to keep them relevant. In the current scenario where global cultural industries and even Indian
현대
Bollywood cultural
인도
industry.
볼리우드 산업에서 또
Hello? Sorry? Can you hear me? Should I continue? Are proving to be formidable, irresistible forces. I, for one, find it commendable to see youth digging into their roots and incorporating traditional fashions with global cultural ones. It presents possibilities for cultural diversity that hitherto would have found its closest approximation in the phenomenon of third culture kids. Third culture kids being children of a particular nationality who have either been born in or moved to another nation and who spend their formative years in nations foreign to them, thereby imbibing linguistic and cultural mores of these nations. One of the concomitant outcomes of this kind of experience is the feeling of simultaneously belonging everywhere and not belonging anywhere. This sense of situated placelessness is something that has been rendered pervasive in our digital age, to the extent that one can argue any and all youth with virtual access to the global community can now identify with the third culture experience. By their third edition, David C. Pollock and Ruth E. Van Recken, authors of the seminal Third Culture Kids Growing Up Among Worlds, noticed that there were too many people who identified with all or most of the subjectivity of the third culture kid, many whose parents had not taken them around the world. To correct for this and allow a more expansive term, Van Recken coined the term cross-cultural kids. As you can see from this definition, the second part, I quote, meaningfully interacted with or more cultural environments, unquote, now allows for an experience of diverse cultures without perhaps ever having to have physically lived there. With increasingly democratized access to digital and social media, access that continues to become more immersive, whether in the form of virtual reality or relationships, very intimate ones, forged with people and communities spread across the globe. For instance, digital access from increasingly earlier ages means that the first language many Naga children now hear are English or Hindi by means of television, YouTube, and various early learning online channels or apps, in the backdrop of a fast-changing social fabric where parents are mostly out working and the onus of education or cultural familiarization is left to digital media. So that for many Naga children, particularly in urban areas, not only is English or Hindi the first language with which a child becomes familiar, but also that the very variant with which they are familiar is vastly alienated from his or her immediate cultural context. So if the earlier quoted Naga writer Visher Sana struggled to do away with his village accent in the 1950s, the more common phenomena are Naga children who speak with British accents of Peppa Pig, the American accents of PJ Masks, inflections of Dora the Explorer, and youth who teach themselves how to speak Korean or Japanese in order to keep up with the growing global K-pop or manga communities. Many of my respondents are either too young or do not have the capital to travel outside the state. Through technology and social media, they are able to access locations, people, and culture
Professor Keditsu,
globally.
Professor
And you-
Keditsu,
Yes?
would you mind to wrap up your presentation within 3 minutes?
I'm almost done. Thank you. They are able to access locations, people, cultures globally and use these to construct identities. This allows many to insert themselves in matrices that sidestep the national. By that, I mean our insertion into a national imagination and narrative as tribal, backward, and seditionary subjects, lost in some kind of primitive idyllic life or stuck in a cycle of conflict. Social media allows one to connect with contemporary global cultures. Most of us who have faced in varying degrees discrimination in and from the mainland imagine how empowering it is not to simply resist narratives of liminality, minority politics, and persecution, but to be completely oblivious of these during our formative years. To not only think of oneself as the center of the universe and to be able to actually place oneself through fashion and image within this fluid, electronic, hyperreal universe. In this context, these looks are digital iterations of cultural diversity, representing a broad range of cultural references as the user creator's proficiency permits. These images challenge the notion of Nagas as disconnected from their indigenous roots. Rather, they argue for a dynamic engagement with one's traditional cultural materials and a desire to keep them relevant. At the same time, they also challenge the idea of Nagas as isolated indigenous natives, removed from modernity and the social and cultural capital of globalization. In a multicultural context, agency and proficiency in choice-making manifest as the ability to create pastiche. Contradictions do not undermine representations. It is, in fact, the structuring element. The growing body of Instagram images of Nagas wearing their traditional attire in full or combined with other fashions is evidence of the ways in which Nagas are taking control of their own representation in visual discourse and dismantling the long-held stereotype of the naked Nagas. Because Instagram allows users to create, edit, frame, and disseminate images of bodies that they have deliberately styled, the Naga body is no longer subject to the restrictive regime of another's camera, or if we are to also consider the caption and hashtag features, as we should, to the power of another's pen. It is 2022. There are very few in the world who are not digital natives. Thanks to Instagram, Nagas are able to take this term natives, one that has oppressed us for so long, and refract it to create spectacular rainbows that bring together our past, present, and future, even as it incorporates diverse cultures of the world. Thank you.
감사합니다. 중간에 조금
Thank you very much. We had a brief slide hiccups. Sorry for not giving that information appropriately. I was kind of late to inform you about that. Actually, I read your article beforehand, so I went to Instagram and followed this account, and I saw many interesting photos there, which was very interesting. I strongly urge other participants today to go Instagram and follow this account. It is really interesting, and many faces are really familiar. They're more like Koreans in their looks and appearances.
Yes.
So it's interesting to see and to flip out all the different photos there. Thinking about this, so digital native, that concept,
Mhm.
they are not just a native, but they are not just aggressive or resisting native, but just global native to combine the traditional cultures with globalism. Thank you very much for your presentation. Next is Ji-Yeong, professor from Changwon National University, to give presentation about the criticizing multiculturalism from the perspective of Bruno Latour's multiculturalism. Sorry for being mute for a while. So Professor Yoon will give her presentation. We'll give you 20 minutes for presentation. I will also chime in again 3 minutes before the end of your presentation time. Good afternoon, everybody. Today, I'm going to talk about Bruno Latour's multinationalism to criticize multiculturalism. So this is my presentation. So my subtitle is Cultural Diversity and Feminist Issues from the Perspective of the Actor Network Theory. So I want to make it a presentation mode, but I will proceed anyway. So this is the Article 1 of the UNESCO Universal Declaration on Cultural Diversity. It says the culture takes diverse forms across times and space. This diversity is embodied in the uniqueness of the plurality of the identities of the groups in society, making up humankind. As a source of exchange, innovation, and creativity, cultural diversity is as necessary for humankind as biodiversity is for nature. So in this declaration, it says about the cultural diversity and the natural diversity is something that is juxtaposed with each other. Here we can see the meaning of humankind, what kind of perspective they are thinking when they see each other. So humankind, they think they are the one who have values and exchanging values with each other. And this uh, declaration, it says the coexistence, peace, and compromise as its keyword. But diversity is coming from Latin diversus. So it says the confrontation and disharmony and discordance. So it is not a kind way to have the culture, but is a dynamic fight against achieving the culture. So the culture multiculturalism have many culture diversity concepts. We have subculture, and second we have perspective culture, in which the belief and religions are having their belief. And third is a collective culturalism, in which one ethnicity have their collectivism to go against another. So here they have a narrow type of uh, culturalism. So here, racial group and others have their own identity in an inclusive manner. So in the presentation, I'd like to talk about to criticize cultural concepts multiculturalism uses as premise, and to review the strength and limitation of interculturality and transculturality, and demonstrate the necessity of the multilaterality of Bruno Latour, and then want to criticize the power effect inherent in the cultural diversity concept of multiculturalism, and also as a subculture to go against other cultures, how it is expressed in the anti-hijab movement in Iran from the perspective of the actor network theory. So the cultural concept of the multiculturalism is the culture that is separable, closed, and isolated. And the culture for the human race and the ethnicity, that is, they have the huge boundaries, and one culture is included in only in one ethnicity. And those multiculturalists, they have their own rational collectivism, they have their own boundary, and they exclusively go against others who are outside of the boundary. And internally, they have one single collectivism. Then whose culture is it? Because in the multiculturalism, when we say there's a single culture, they don't think about the race and others, as well as they also have to include age and gender difference in one. That's why when we include all of those, only then can we have one single culturalism. Without that, we will force other gender or other people in other age classes to follow the majority. So another limitation that we have is that all the disadvantages are perceived as they are originated from other cultures. That's why it goes to the extremism and also go to the confrontation between two different parts. For them, they don't have any economic merits or benefits in the society. That is going against the social economy that we are having. The culture that is premised by the cultural diversity, to go beyond to that, we have to adopt the alternative concepts. They are the interculturality and transculturality. What are they? So interculturality, inter is the prefix to have interactive changes and discourses between different cultures. However, multiculturalism is not interested in other cultures, and they think other cultures in the different ghetto, and they try to keep a distance from other cultures. Interculturality, they see culture as a complex being to have dynamism and the possibility of change. They are not in the juxtaposed positions. Rather, with different background, they can understand each other in an interactive manner. However, this interculturality, we can meet and we can interact with each other under this interculturality when we have two different cultures. The interculturality is also recognizing cultures. They are different and they are divided. So this kind of boundary is inherent in the interculturality that is going against the globalism in which we are trying to go transcend all the boundaries that is in existence in the physical world. And also in different cultures, when they have discourse, they try to go in a logical and a verbal communication. Only with that communication we can communicate and interact with each other. But there are non-verbal communication possible. That is also the source of the conflict and interaction. But they do not track other cultures. The transculturality, there trans is a prefix that is traverse and penetrate and interlink and assimilate with each other. So that means that is going beyond the culture concept that is dividing and assimilate with each other. So it goes beyond what is mine, what is yours. We go together in one bowl. So in the transculturality, we go beyond the original and instinctive way of seeing culture. We do not see culture to be subjectified one authentic culture origination. Rather, even if I have one single identity, I can be in the mixed cultural impacts. I can combine them. I can develop them further. Thereby, this transculturality in its concept, it is going free from other interculturality or culture by escaping from the privileges we have. As if you are going in the all-you-can-eat buffet, you can choose something that you want to eat. That means you have somewhat high level of authority to choose something. And it is relying in the culture concept, that is the symbol and the signals that is invented by grids. So this kind of disorderly fashion of the cultural orientation is not well interpreted here.
According to Nats Plato and Greece, the separation of nature from society is ambition of the 16th century, and also it is from the capitalistic violence, and also multiculturalism, and also culture. The binary system is also according to the purification of multinaturalism, because modernity separates nature from culture, and it aims to purify what's real. What the purification means by it's a creation of the space in which the humans and also nature belongs separately. And between humans, that also the venue for differences between them. However, multinaturalism is different because the humans depend on tangible things, and also the totality of different elements of nature and humans can stand together. So universal and single nature, and also a unique culture. The cultural diversity is according to binary system, but multinaturalism respect both, and also coexistence of the two in harmony, and also that does not point out relativism and also multiplicity of nature and humans. Both of them are not separated from each other. Rather, they can form each other, they can redefine with each other. Multiplicity of the nature and also culture does not see the connection between them is unique, but the connection between them can disappear, and also it can lead to formation of other things, leading to fluidity of the connection. Now, let me turn to strengths of multinaturalism. For example, the concept of nature, culture, goes beyond the separation of multiculturalism and the cultural concept of close unity. Secondly, beyond the limits of the dialogue model, presupposed by the concept of interculturality, multinaturalism shows a multi-layered network of material discourse exchanges. Thirdly, multinaturalism also respect aspects of power relations that the concept of transculturality tends to omit, can be dealt with at the level of translation. By doing so, the problems of politics and power can be tangible. And it also can be divided into indigenous culture and also immigrant culture, different cultures in the same space. The coexistence of that is presupposed by multiculturality. And the indigenous culture reflects the history of territorial conquest, of capitalist imperialism, invention of non-human objects such as steamship, guns, and telegraph technology, and also through mobilization. That is closely related to imperialism. And thanks to steamships and guns, non-human materials helped indigenous culture coexist with other cultures. So it means that indigenous culture, its boundary is not just defined by others. And also, when it comes to immigrant culture, until the 1970s in Western Europe, immigrants were the result of outsourcing of risks in the 3D industry and the influx of cheaper labor and also the development of transportation technologies such as airplanes, ships, and trains. So non-human objects are connected to humans, and also harmful substances in heavy industry. And also it is thanks to the connection of those harmful substances with the labor from developing countries. And also that has always been an issue in our society. Within ethical minority groups, oppression on them has been at the center of discussion around multiculturality. And that was represented as a dynamism against the mainstream culture that has not been under the limelight. And so that means that there's a subordinate culture and also diversity of faith of women, those who are wearing hijab. That was also one of my research subject. According to John Lloyd, actor, and also the theory network is like this. Not only the nature, but also our society, they believe that they make each other. According to the theory, not only this is society, but also everything is according to binary system, animals, humans, architecture. So it includes everything, humans and non-humans. From the perspective of a theory, the stick, the woman's body, and hijab, perspective of others, and also differences between the cultures. We are going to see how they play into this theory. So that is a dynamism where everything starts to form by itself. So in December 2017, the street of Angela in Tehran, the movement to take off the hijab started. That was sparked by one lady who took the lead in this movement. Hijab, the combination of hijab and also the body of a woman, that will not be the all essence of this movement, but by not taking everything as granted, we can lead to another movement at the second stage of our translation. For example, by raising public awareness, and we can start a negotiation. So according to the existing network, the stick is playing its part. So it means that she resists to what she has to do. That divides the body of a woman and also body of men. Now, by connecting her body with a stick, that stick is not just a stick, but it is like a political flag. In order to raise more awareness, she stands up to the point where that is higher than where others are standing. In the short time, she successfully garnered attention. And yes, please wrap up your presentation within 3 minutes. Yes, and also registration is the third stage of a translation. So hijab, that object stuck to the stick, is now a flag, and that represent the voices of women who are resisting, and also that plays its role as an amplifier. And also in the public space, which used to be the space for men, now the public space became the space for women who once raised their voices. And also the perspectives, conservative perspectives from the general public is now reflected upon photographs taken. And where is Fee, that hashtag was stuck to it, and that amplified the phenomenon. And also police officers also played its role in the photo, that rather their existence in that photograph reduced what they tried to do. And the last stage of our translation, the mobilizing is the last stage, the act of including into one's network. So network between humans and non-humans are now toppled apart, so that we started to give new meaning to stick and also white cloth. So during the wartime, by waving it, it means that they surrender that was existing meaning. However, by waving white cloth with the stick, completely different results came from this act. For example, shouting, going forward, and also waving your body hard. So the existing network turned out to be completely different one, quietly waving the stick with white cloth at the end. In the public space, the lady confidently displayed her hair in the public space, and that means she desperately resisted to wearing hijab. So she stood high in the public space, and she also invited not only young women but also older women, and also by taking photographs and by putting hashtag, that effect was expanded via social media. So when combining all these elements, all other actors were also included in this network. So like this, the body of a woman did not only end up as the actual tangible body, but also it turned out to be more powerful entity. By doing so, this kind of movement, by forging the network between humans and nature, turned out to be alternative movement to reduce men. And it was a subordinate culture, and also it included the various perspectives and also cultural diversity. So entanglement of nature and also humans were not reflected upon cultural diversity, but it was well reflected onto multinaturalism by recognizing it's a free movement that expanded the landscape of men and nature. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. The multilateralism is a new perspective to see the movement of Iran females. And now our discussant will give question to each presenter one by one. By asking one question, we'll get an answer directly and move on to next presenter. So discussant Professor Lee, please go. I'm
First of all, please excuse any mistakes due to my limited English and my short knowledge about Naga culture. Hence, I will just make the point quickly. Your presentation is based on the ideas of Gattari, who likened the interactive system of modern society to a new universe of reference. You explained that the inherent visuality of images allow bodies and fashion to be the focal reference of identity, and that these images can absorb a multitude of identities. According to your point, the young Nagas who have access to Instagram pull down the restrictive regime of others' camera. With that, these Instagram users demonstrate their identity as digital natives away from indigenous natives. I have a, yes, that's okay. Okay, yeah. So let me ask you a question. You see that the young Nagas with access the virtual global community can now identify with the third culture case experience. I totally agree with you because we also have our cross-culture generation in Korea. You estimate that your third culture case can create images that unite past, present, and future of Naga by representing cultural references. How about other cross-culture kids? Not only our kids, but also all the young citizens of everywhere and nowhere. From the point of view of cultural diversity, what do you think they can do? Thank you in advance for your answer. Is it all right?
Yes, thank you so much, Professor, for this question. I think it poses, you know, as in my paper is just an example of Naga youth in this small little corner of the world. Because of convenience, you know, I'm able to do research. But the thing is, when you look at social media, I find that, you know, Instagram is a very interesting field of research, social media in general, because even as researchers, we're able to literally, you know, do field work without leaving, you know, our homes even. We can just sit and, you know, sort of scour through social media and do a kind of field work. And when you look at youth in general, all over the world, one of the things, especially when it comes to images and especially when it comes to social media images, you know, there really is, you know, sort of very broad overarching commonalities in the ways that youth represent themselves. And these days, you know, I think the question becomes more, is it even possible to represent yourself in a monocultural way? Is that even possible? You know, because let's say even the very sort of technology we use to represent ourselves. Now, since this conference is happening in Korea, so let me use the example of a Samsung phone, which is, you know, the kind of phone that most people use, you know. So, and even if we say iPhone, you know, iPhone's actually taken cues from, you know, developments in the Samsung smartphone. And now we find, you know, so, but let me just use the example of a Samsung phone or sort of other brands like Chinese brands like Oppo, etc. You can't take a picture of yourself the way you really are, because even technology refuses to photograph you, you know, even in sort of, how may I say, at the risk of being politically incorrect, even in racially accurate ways. Because the minute, suppose you take a selfie, your complexion has been changed, the size of your eyes, you know, sort of. So all of us look, and especially, particularly with the Samsung phone, particularly with, you know, sort of the success and, you know, craze for K-pop culture, you know, the way we photograph ourselves, the way we represent ourselves digitally is sort of in a way Koreanized. You know, and perhaps one of the reasons why, you know, when you go to Naga street style and you find, oh, wow, there's so many similarities between all these Naga people on this one Instagram handle and Korean people there in Korea is, of course, yes, because K-beauty is a very, very big thing here as well as all over the world. But it's also photographic technology in the sense that, you know, it changes the way you look. So my question is it possible for us to even articulate or claim identities in monocultural terms, even bicultural terms, you know? And especially when it comes to the visual medium, I think it completely becomes multicultural because the way you capture yourself is mediated by technologies that are created in another culture according to another culture's standards. And and that cultural standards also are, have developed because of influences from other cultures. So I think across the world, all youth, I think multicultural sort of representations of the self is something that we share in common, I don't know if that answers your question.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you. And I guess Professor Kwang-Jin has another question to Professor Ji-Yeong, right? Good afternoon, Ji-Yeong. Thank you for your presentation. So reading your paper in depth, I think that made me really think about a lot. So, I mean, in multiculturality, sometimes the culture is combined with the politics, and also effect of that turns out to be various ones. That's something that I have been overlooking. And in your paper, in order to address the problems raised by multiculturality, you pointed out many things. In order to overcome the issues raised by multiculturality, you touched upon reciprocal, mutual culture, and also transcending culture. And plus, in order to be away from binary system, you touched upon Bruno Latour's multinaturality and its necessity. And also, you touched upon the examples on diversity of expressing women's body. And there are many questions, but due to constraints, I would like to ask you one question. You talked about many things, and as a speaker before me already said, it is similar to cross-culture kid. So human-centric rationalism can be violent. And by recognizing that, we forge a relationship with nature, and we recognize the relationship. And maybe it could be the other way around according to causality and also result. Maybe disasters, environmental issues. Separating nature from human is very dangerous, and multinaturality is appropriate concept for us to forge a relationship with nature. So the body of humans and also body of non-human things are very important. And I think that even leads to the responses that we need to take against AI. According to your paper, so culture is like a process of circulating with nature, and also that's the way to connect with nature. And metaverse is a hot topic. That is also the act of exchanging things, material things and non-material things. So between human and AI, or human and non-human things, I think that could be very different networks. I think it is not only limited to visualization, but that is the process of forming culture. We can take cultural approach. For example, between humans and AI, the network between them is not something that we can see from films, but that is going to be a universal thing around the world. So between these two subjects, I think political power will appear. So according to one expert, I think we maybe are going to move toward a direction free from politics. And will you be able to explain this kind of a phenomenon with a theory from Bruno Latour's? Thank you for your question in depth. Yes. Bruno Latour was a scientist, and I think he is more than competent theorists to give us a foundation to analyze metaverse and IT and etc. Life logging and also etc. In order to make it possible in our reality, we need to have this platform and which has all different kinds of 5G network and sensors and data network, all of which are non-human materials. And not only that, in virtual reality, in order to make it immersive, we need haptic gloves and AI glasses by Apple or Microsoft. So I think by wearing it on our body, then the boundary between reality and virtual reality will disappear, which creates another culture. So I think it's like overlapping over this digital and also the real environment, which creates another nature or environment. So I think this concept is not only applied to digital natives or Z generation. I think it gives us a new kind of culture. This is how I analyze the phenomenon. Thank you for good discussion.
성실히 답변을 잘 해주셔가지고 제가 훨씬 이해를 하기가 저뿐만 아니라 여기 플로우 계신 청중 여러분들도 굉장히 좋은
It was
이해를
very good
하시는데
for understanding the gist of the
큰
communication here, the presentation from the presenters, and also the point that the presenters try to make. And from the floor, we got two questions for the first presenter and one question for the second presenter. But I do have my own question, but I will ask the floor question first, then I will move on my own question to Professor Keditsu first. First, thank you very much for your presentation. It was useful and meaningful. Thank you very much. My question is to you, the digital technology development and existing ethnic tradition through their interaction, do you think it can enhance the value of the cultural diversity? To put another way, the technical development and the traditional ethnical tradition that we have, if they do interaction between each other, do you think the cultural diversity and its value can be enhanced? That's my first question. And if you think that is possible, then the cultural phenomenon that is changing because of the technical development, how we can preserve our traditions while promoting our cultural diversity. We have to preserve traditional ethnicity while promoting cultural diversity. In the middle, we will have conflict or confrontation. How do you think we can solve those conflicts? That is the question from the floor. If you can answer to this question, then I will move on to the second presenter.
Thank you. These are very important questions. I think very quickly, what I've tried to argue in my presentation is that yes, actually technological developments and access to digital media actually has, sort of created a new avenue for ethnic expressions. And that's something very interesting because I think if I'm correct, in Korea, you're very good and very serious about, preserving your culture. Maybe that may not be so the case here in Nagaland, because as I very briefly mentioned, our history is one of, very devastating colonization. And for us, especially when it comes to, our traditions and our ethnic culture, the conversion, missionization, And that also because we know missionaries traveled all over the world and converted many different types of people. But sadly for us, it was Baptist missionaries that came. So then because it was Baptist missionaries, they brought with them this very sort of more fundamentalist idea, very rigid idea that it's one or the other, and that if you convert, you can no longer at all participate in any way in traditional life, to the extent that with the history of conversion to Christianity amongst the Nagas, early Christians were chased out of their villages, or they were compelled to, move out and begin new villages. And, we're talking about, a life world where for a Naga, your village is really the center of your identity. There is no such thing as a Naga without a village. So that when you look at how conversion actually compelled converts to move out of their village, it is literally, sort of a breaking of yourself, a severing of your roots. So this is how traumatic it was. Very sadly, I was not able to show you one of the slides. I think that was one of the ones you missed. But this writer, Visher Sana, in his autobiography, he grew up in the 50s. But he writes about this experience because he comes as a village boy to Kohima, which is the capital of the state, an urban center, and he joins a missionary school, because those days the only schools were missionary schools. And once you join missionary schools, if you were not a convert, you became very conspicuous, because you would be wearing your traditional dress, which meant that many parts of your bodies were exposed, including genitalia. And he writes about the kind of bullying that he underwent, the kind of trauma that he underwent. So we need to understand that this was the case for us Nagas. And so we've gone from, a period of absolute separation, a very sort of traumatic separation from our traditional culture, to a kind of very awkward, uncomfortable relationship where, when Naga people see other Naga people in tribal dress, and if that means that some parts of their body are exposed, many Nagas laugh in embarrassment, which is a very strange thing, because our forefathers were mostly, our bodies were exposed. And, during the time of our fathers, this was not, an issue for embarrassment or even, fun. So we went from that period to now. And one of the things that has happened, with this increasing access to digital media, as I've argued it in my paper, is when you look at these images that young people, or now increasingly even older people, post of themselves, they show their naked body. They show themselves in costume and expose parts of their bodies, which, within a very strict Christian moral framework would have been, almost sacrilegious and profane. So I see digital technological developments as, yes, definitely having great potential to enhance the value of cultural diversity.
네, 교수님 답변 감사드립니다.
Thank you very much for the question.
So to my understanding, because we do not know quite well about Nagas, I think that was one of the reasons why this kind of a question was raised. According to your explanation, thanks to digital technology, especially via Instagram, the young Nagas express themselves via Instagram, and sometimes wearing traditional clothes and at the same Nike shoes at the same time, which shows a new way of fashion, and that does not collide with the traditional culture, but that leads to new invention, combining tradition and at the same time a modern culture. And as you mentioned, in Korean society as well, by utilizing this technology well, traditional culture that we have is being globalized in advertising industry, and even advertising leaflets by the government. So I think this way I understood your explanation. And I have a question for Professor Ji-Yeong during the morning session. I think you talked about difference between multiculturalism and also cultural diversity. Do you still distinguish one from the other in your paper? Yes, the cultural diversity, multiculturalism, they are not the same thing, but I think we just use it mixing together. And I categorize into three different groups in order to explain to you about multiculturalism. And I think the third types of cultural diversity is understood as a multiculturalism. For example, identity of ethnicity, and also the concept of race is now understood as equivalent to the cultural diversity these days. But cultural diversity, multiculturalism are different. Cultural diversity, I think, is broader, including multiculturalism. That's how I think. So when that is the case in our reality, within the language of politics, cultural diversity, multiculturalism are mixed together, but I told you that there are three different subcategories under cultural diversity. Thank you so much. So, Professor Lee, you received answers for the question from the two speakers. Do you have further questions? You said that you have questions, right? Then I better give a time to you.
We have about 14 minutes left. Now it's my chance to ask questions to the presenters. So first, I have to give you my position first. So, ironically, I was measuring in and studying in the social media about Iranian females. The hijab was one of the topics I had my article when I had PhD, and also the younger generation in Iran was also another topic of research that I had, and also social media, maybe Instagram, others, how they use it, those as a tool to show their resistance to the oppression. So I'm an anthropologist. So from my perspective, I can feel the connection from your presentation also in my research. So I have two questions. First to Professor Keditsu. So the young Naga people on Instagram, they post many postings there, like it's a resistance to the globalization to show their identity, if I understand correctly. But from my perspective, yes, that is correct. We can see it in that way. But my question is rather in the many people are living in your country, and there the Naga, for those other people from Western country, Korean and others, to expose themselves rather than exposing it internally on the land, maybe those other tribes or other people in your country who are majority in their number or population. So within your own country, isn't it a way to show and expose your identity internally, domestically? That's one of my questions.
Fabulous question, Professor. You're so right, because again, very quickly, but the history of the Naga people is also very unique, because the Naga people actually asked the British, because at one point there was no India, we were all under the British Empire. So then we had actually asked the British independence from the British. We never asked independence from India. And sadly, the British did not give us independence, and India was declared, a country. And the minute India, at that time, Jawaharlal Nehru realized that the Naga people were not interested in joining the Indian Union, he sent the army. So, and then now, up till now, we have one of the longest histories of armed occupation of the Naga lands. And so this is a very, very brief history. But given this context, yes, asserting a Naga identity to a mainland Indian audience is also very, very important because, you know, if some of you are aware, there's a state just next door. We have a neighboring state like Arunachal Pradesh, and India has definitely tried. You know, it's not just in terms of military and political, but it's also definitely been, you know, trying very hard in the cultural front to sort of assimilate, you know, sort of peoples that are sort of significantly more different than perhaps, you know, a very diverse range of Indians, because at the end of the day, India is very diverse. So it is very, you know, it is an act of daring, it is an act of resistance. And on this note, I just want to say that, you know, digital media and especially social media, because of the, you know, sort of the kind of intimate access and attachment it has with users, is actually able to circumvent surveillance, you know, whether it's in a way state surveillance, it's, you know, sort of able to circumvent parental authority, because Naga culture is also very conservative and traditional in that way, that we have a great respect for our elders, our parents, and, you know, those who are, you know, sort of advanced in age are the ones who are arbitrators of how society should run, what should be done, etc. And suddenly you have this thing, digital media, you have, you know, your own smartphone where young people can keep posting images of themselves that they will broadcast to the rest of the world, and their father or mother will have no idea that that has been done. So, you know, in that sense, there's a great, you know, I mean, you know, it's not just resistance, it's a great potential for subversion of, you know, all these different networks of authority in which we find ourselves. And then also one of the things that we need to also I just want to mention is, you know, whatever it is, even if it is a necessary evil, we are you know, sort of embedded within this complex of capitalism and market. And in you know, in this, if you want to gain some power, or if you want to, you know, sort of engage in forms of resistance and subversion, many times one of the ways that, you know, you can do it, and perhaps one of the ways that you can be heard, is to argue for your economic value, you know, sort of your value in the market. And in this sense, you know, something like soft power, especially for people who are powerless in many other aspects, because for the Nagas, because of our long history with India, we are now more or less, you know, we're extremely dependent on the Indian state for money. We don't have, you know, any sort of traditionally successful indigenous industries, you know. So in that sense, we are very impoverished in, you know, sort of industrial economic by these parameters. But when it comes to soft power, when it comes to cultural power, you know, this is something that, you know, I think many Naga youth, and now increasingly even our government, even our elders, because now we are trying to promote Nagaland as a tourist destination. So in these in these areas, it is possible for us to try and, you know, sort of see if we can develop some kind of soft power, and then it, you know, so in that sense, it's sort of win-win. You know, we gain income for ourselves, but we also gain some kind of, perhaps a little bit of, you know, power and say as to, you know, how we should be treated.
네, 감사합니다. 케디츠 교수님.
Thank you very much. Yes, as you explained, Naga Street Slide, please check it out and like it. You please follow the account. When you look at the style within it, young people, and there's also a website, very famous one called Mushinsa in Korea, expressing oneself. And young people who want to express oneself are very symbolic there in website. And the same can be said of the Naga street style. There's not a single concept in there. There are various stories, various elements, and soft power, as you mentioned. And we call it like a mecca of Instagram. So very hip and popular Naga young people. I think by visiting that account, I think would make American young people, Korean young people would try out the clothes of Naga people. I think one day that will be realized in the near future. And I have a question and a comment for Professor Ji-Yeong. As the person who wrote about that, who wrote a paper about that during my master's course, I think I really like that this approach, that the approach that you took was very new to me, and also the theory that you used was very new to me. And your paper was like an eye-opening paper for me. Thank you so much. And one comment that I have for you is that Professor said that a woman holding stick with white cloth at the end. I think there's more room for our additional interpretation. When you imagine white cloth and waving it with the stick, then that means surrender, right? But here, the white means different, right? There's a social movement called White Wednesday. For example, in Iran, women have to wear hijab regardless of religion. Unless you wear hijab, foreign women like myself can be, for example, taken away. So women made a promise. If we take off, then we will be taken away. So every Wednesday, let's wear white hijab so that we can convey the message that although we wear hijab, as the color is white, we oppose the idea of wearing hijab. That's what they promised. And white hijab at the end of the stick waved by the woman is not the color of a surrender, but I think that is a part of the white hijab movement, White Wednesday, I think. So I'm not sure whether that can be simply interpreted as ANT. That's just a personal question. And my last question is that according to the paper that I received right before the end of your paper, multiculturalism ignore the majority of the culture, and that is related to the perspective of a subordinate culture, and that represents dynamism of cultural diversity. So you talked about subordinate culture, which goes against the mainstream culture, which was overlooked. I thought to myself, really, the multiculturalism overlooked the mainstream culture? I think that's the other way around, isn't it? Multiculturalism has always respected the mainstream culture as a subordinate culture under the multiculturalism or a subordinate culture under cultural diversity. And I just wanted to ask you why multiculturalism, you said, is overlooking the mainstream culture under culture diversity. Thank you for making comments about White Wednesday. I would like to reflect your opinion upon my paper. Let me answer your question. And in the beginning of my paper, there are three different categories on the cultural diversity, and the subject of criticism is one theory from Quebec in Canada, and he laid a foundation for multiculturalism, and he took an approach of a third category, for example, minorities and religion and gender, and also demand for politics and politics of race. That's what he limited to when he explained about cultural diversity. And also there's a feminist, two feminists, and they are colliding with each other based on their discourse and all the problems raised by one feminist. For example, unique culture, for example, removing the woman's genitals. Multiculturalism may be overlooked. This kind of a cultural praxis in the name of cultural diversity. The other feminists answer that it is a way to enhance the main culture of one race and ethnicity. But the other said that is the customs that needs to be eradicated. And the third, I limited my talk to the third category under the cultural diversity. And for example, bad custom that needs to be eradicated, and also good custom that needs to be respected. But in many cases, when we look into minorities mentioned by Milkina, when we thought of the traditions of them, it is mainly focused on sexuality, limitations and control of the sexuality, and also reproducing future generations. When we think that way, that is problem of the customs, whether we have to think about whether the bad customs are completely separated from the good customs to be respected. So from the beginning, I mentioned the limitations that I'm going to place when I talk about the third category of cultural diversity. From the 1970s, multiculturalism discourse. When we think about the cultural diversity, we do not only limit minorities, but we also include the digital natives and also intergenerational gaps and differences. And that's why I limited the concept of cultural diversity.
이게 문화 다양성이라는 거 자체도 어떤 언어나 그리고 학문 영역에 따라서 굉장히 다르게 이제 개념화가 되기 때문에 사실
Depending on language and depending on places, the meaning of cultural diversity is very different. So in the article given by you, that is well categorized how we can define cultural diversity in different ways. But actually, cultural diversity as diversity is bring lots of different interpretation or definitions, and even different scholars have different definitions on it. So personally, when we think about the hijab culture and the Hallye tradition, when we think about it from the perspective of the tradition, maybe this can be very difficult and challenging topic that will provoke debates from many people. Whether it would be a bad tradition or whether we accuse it of the sexual discrimination, that is something that we need to discuss. So for this reason, I'd like to have more conversation, but due to the interest of time, I have to finish my session here. I'd like to express my deepest gratitude to all the presenters and also the discussant for your active participation. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I am handed over the mic by the session 2 participant. So thank you very much, moderator. Thank you for your excellent leading of the session and the participants, the Professor Theyie Esinuo and Ji-Yeong. Thank you very much for your participation, and also to the panelists. We will end our second session here. We will have about 10 minutes of break time to resume our third and last session. Thank you very much.
오늘 너무 고생 많으셨습니다. Thank you, Professor Keditsu.